On September 10, 1982, Mary Kellerman woke up early, got herself ready for work, and headed downstairs to grab some breakfast. After finishing her meal, she took a couple of Tylenol tablets for a headache, then drove off to work at the bank where she worked as a clerk. But later that night, Mary would be found dead in her bed from an apparent overdose. The police suspected foul play, but there was no forced entry and nothing was stolen, so they eventually ruled it as a possible suicide. Just 1 week later, another woman was found dead in her home after also taking Tylenol. Then a few days after that, a man who'd taken the exact same thing was found dead too. Soon the police began to suspect that these seemingly random deaths might all be connected by something they all had in common: Tylenol. And as the investigation continued, things would go from bad to worse, with the FBI eventually getting involved as more victims would turn up dead across the country. But here's the thing: every single person who died didn't take their Tylenol the wrong way. They all took the correct dosage, but that still killed them. So what happened? And even more importantly, who was responsible? Let's talk about it. But don't forget to show your support if you're enjoying the content. It really helps me out. In total, 7 people would die during the 2-week span, 6 in Chicago and 1 in California. The victims ranged between the ages of 27 and 62, and all but one were found in their own homes. So when the police finally connected the dots and realized that each victim had taken Tylenol right before they died, they contacted the pharmaceutical company who made it, Johnson & Johnson, to see if there could be anything wrong with the batch numbers that the victims had used. Now it turns out that the answer was yes. A few days prior, a pharmacist in West Chicago called the Poison Control Center because he had questions about one of his customers who had been buying lots of Tylenol recently. And when they traced the customer's purchase history, they found that almost all of them were from the same Walgreens store where Mary Kellerman had bought hers. The pharmacist then compared the lot number of the Tylenol tablets in question to the numbers of the 7 victims and found that they were all the same. This led him to believe that the drug itself must have somehow become contaminated. But given that the drugs had been on the market for years without causing problems, how could this have happened all of a sudden? Well, in a desperate attempt to solve the mystery, the pharmacist decided to run tests on samples from different batches of Tylenol. His efforts paid off when he found cyanide in several of the capsules he tested. He quickly contacted the company and informed them of his discovery, which prompted them to recall the product across the whole country. That's right, in just over 24 hours, Johnson & Johnson recalled over 31 million bottles of Tylenol from stores across the United States and Canada. To make matters worse, this was the first time in American history that a product had been recalled due to contamination concerns. So there was no real protocol for something like this, which caused total chaos and panic to ensue. The media ran rampant with stories, leading the public to believe that Tylenol was now a killer drug that could end your life, even if you took it the right way. People across the country began calling poison control centers, not just about Tylenol, but other medications as well. Store shelves were emptied as people threw away any medication they had at home. And even schools had to cancel classes, because so many parents kept their kids home in fear of them accidentally taking the wrong medicine. Johnson & Johnson's stock prices dropped massively, though they did do the right thing by issuing refunds for the recalled products and increasing safety measures in their manufacturing plants. But despite all the public backlash, the truth is that no one knew exactly what had happened. There was no evidence of tampering in any of the packaging, which meant that someone must have tampered with the drug itself, but we didn't know who or how. With all this uncertainty, it wasn't long before everyone started pointing fingers at one another. Was it an employee at the plant who had done it on purpose? Or maybe a disgruntled business competitor who wanted to get back at J&J? We simply didn't know. But in the coming weeks, the FBI would identify several key suspects who all had access to the Tylenol at various points before it hit the shelves. First, there was the pharmacist who had reported the problem in the first place. It was cleared pretty quickly since he had reported it. But that didn't stop the FBI from also looking into a former J&J employee who had gone through a bitter divorce from her supervisor and a disgruntled ex-employee who had been fired months earlier. But as the months passed, all 3 were cleared of any wrongdoing. And that's why the Tylenol murders, as they came to be known, would go cold for over 4 decades. The FBI had exhausted every lead and had absolutely no idea what had happened. But their investigation didn't completely go to waste, though, because in 1983, New safety measures were introduced for all pharmaceuticals, including tamper-evident packaging and lot number tracking. This prevented similar tragedies from happening again, but it did leave the original case unsolved. That is until 2025, when the case was shockingly reopened. The reason for this is because technology had finally caught up to the point where investigators could revisit the evidence with new eyes. With modern forensics, perhaps they could find something the old methods had missed. But as far as we know, they haven't revealed what exactly they hope to discover with their reopening, though it's likely that they have some new DNA evidence that might finally lead to an arrest. After all, there was one thing the FBI was certain of. This wasn't a case of mass poisoning. If it was, we would have found out by now. But 7 very specific people had been murdered, which means that somebody had to have deliberately tampered with the Tylenol and put poison in it. So whoever was responsible clearly knew exactly what they were doing. Even the way the poison was applied to the capsules was incredibly precise, having been placed in such a way that it wouldn't be noticed during the manufacturing process, but only discovered when someone took the Tylenol and the poison was released into their body. In fact, it was only thanks to that pharmacist that we even know the poison was cyanide, because he actually found traces of it inside the capsules himself. Otherwise, we might have never known what was inside those tiny little pills. And, to make matters even more confusing, the cyanide wasn't just deadly, but it was also extremely hard to detect, which explains why the 7 victims had no idea that they were taking a poison. The FBI even consulted with a toxicologist, who stated that it would be impossible to taste or smell the poison in the food coloring used in the Tylenol capsules. So once you ate it, you wouldn't have known that you'd consumed anything harmful. This makes it all the more surprising that even today, we don't know who would have been capable of such a thing. Was it a botched attempt at murder by someone who targeted the victim specifically, or was it just a random act of violence by a stranger? Unfortunately, the truth is that unless the FBI finds new evidence, we may never know for sure. It was even suggested that Mary, who had originally taken the Tylenol, may have poisoned herself. But that seems unlikely considering that she drove to work afterwards. So if she had taken a lethal dose of poison, she probably wouldn't have been able to. Instead, it seems like all 7 people were unlucky enough to stumble across the same tainted bottle at different times, which is why the police never caught on right away. The entire ordeal was a nightmare scenario for Johnson & Johnson, who were already facing lawsuits from the families of the victims. In response to the tragedy, they hired extra security to protect their employees and even built an on-site security force to keep people away from their manufacturing facilities. They also increased the amount of security cameras around their buildings and restricted tours of their factories. The company's reputation was forever tarnished, but they did everything they could to make up for it. Johnson & Johnson donated millions of dollars to charities in the wake of the crisis and even helped set up a foundation in the name of one of the victims. They also changed the packaging of their medicines to prevent future contamination, but ultimately couldn't compensate for the lives that were lost. As for the families, they were offered counseling services and help from victim advocacy groups. But the pain of losing their loved ones without any answers will likely last a lifetime. And after all this time, they still deserve justice. So hopefully the FBI's reopening of the case will provide the answers they've been waiting for decades to hear. But until then, we can only speculate on what really happened back in 1982. Will this decades-old mystery ever be solved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to show your support if you've enjoyed the content. Thanks for watching.